In 2019, the dictator regime of Omar al-Bashir was overthrown by two Sudanese military forces, that being the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudan Armed Forces, ending a dictator's reign in Sudan and allowing for their mission of their government to be ran by civilians to finally come to fruition. But Sudan's peace only lasted 2 years. The U.S. Institute of Peace can tell us on April 20th of 2023 that just 5 days prior, the RSF launched an attack on SAF bases, essentially triggering a war that just 2 days ago the BBC can call the Sudanese civil war that ceases no end. It's for the reason that the innocent 50 million civilians living in Sudan are being killed by military organizations that are supposed to protect them, that we are demanded to pose today's question. That being, what strategies should al-Burhan, the interim president of the Republic of Sudan, take to mitigate conflict between the SAF and RSF? And the strategies in which the interim president al-Burhan needs to take fall under a diplomatic umbrella. We can further explain in 3 main points of analysis. First, diplomacy allows him to deal with war generals. Second, diplomacy allows him to establish legitimacy. And finally, diplomacy leads to connections on culture. If we thought that domestic politics were messy, just wait until you have to deal with literal war generals. The first reason on why diplomacy is the strategy al-Burhan needs to stopping the conflict is because he's dealing with war generals. Specifically, al-Burhan's task isn't easy. CBS can tell us on April 28th of 2023 that al-Burhan is dealing with two wartime generals in which have full experience in Sudan's ins and outs and how to properly work a military. And the reason of why they're in conflict in the first place is because the RSF didn't get any room in Sudan's official military, signaling to us that this is a conflict over a matter of policy. But diplomacy can be the solution to bargaining with the war generals. The crisis group on January 9th of 2024 can tell us that al-Burhan bringing the war generals to the table not only can lead to a temporary ceasefire, but primarily establishes framework in which allows the RSF to join the SAF in the Sudan military that is professional and unitary for both of these groups. But that is only done through a diplomatic approach. Meaning the first reason of why al-Burhan needs a diplomatic umbrella is because he is dealing with war generals. The second reason of why al-Burhan needs to employ a diplomatic umbrella is because diplomacy is going to allow him to establish legitimacy. Specifically, al-Burhan doesn't have the credentials to lead Sudan in the eyes of many civilians, but diplomacy is what can lead to him establishing a legacy. Al Jazeera, on August 16th of 2023, can tell us that al-Burhan's presidency has been defined by the military coup, but that can shift. But in order for that to shift, he needs a great showing of problem. And the main issue that he has with the conflict over the SAF and the RSF is that he doesn't have a military to back him up. The only way that he can make a message is through his diction. The East African can tell us on September 15th of 2024 that the Sudanese president has done exactly that to try to establish a sense of legitimacy. It's shown through Africa's connections and relationships with China, Ethiopia, and Kenya. If al-Burhan is able to establish that same diplomacy with the RSF and the SAF, then this conflict can soon come to an end. But in order to do that, he needs to know he can establish legitimacy. Because as long as all parties have something to gain, then they will go to the negotiating table. Meaning the second reason of why the strategies al-Burhan needs falls under a diplomatic umbrella is because diplomacy establishes him a legacy. The final reason of why al-Burhan needs diplomatic strategies is because diplomacy allows him to connect on cultures. Because when seeing the wide mass mess in which both of these groups have made on the country of Sudan, then that widens their perspectives and possibly causes them to halt. The New York Times, on January 7th of 2025, can tell us that the conflict in Sudan has killed over 150,000 civilians and displaced 11 million. It's clear that originally the goal between these two organizations wasn't to hurt innocent people in Sudan. Their goal was to protect them. But now, years later, they've been blinded by their rage and disgust over each other. Politico can tell us on August 13th of 2024 that the physical capacity of both Sudanese military organizations have the war to continue for years to come. And both of them are refusing to talk directly to each other, hinting that there's a third party that needs to be added. And when that third party is added, by the form of the interim president, then the talking point that he can make is the damage that both of these groups have caused. And he does that by connecting on culture and the main goal of all of government, and that is to protect innocent civilians, making that the last reason of why Al-Baran needs a diplomatic umbrella, because it allows him to connect on culture. It's for the reason that millions of innocent civilians are being taken away from their lives because of government policy issues that we are demanded to ask today's question, that being, what strategies should Al-Baran, the interim president of the Republic of Sudan, take to mitigate conflict between the SAF and RSF? And what he needs to take is a diplomatic strategy umbrella. Specifically, diplomacy allows him to deal with war generals. Diplomacy allows him to establish legitimacy, and he can connect on culture. Simply put, by just going to the negotiating table, Al-Baran can remind both of these groups that they should stand for peace and security in Sudan.